decided not to. I'm participating. I'm trying to get on right now. I'm here. Yeah, okay. I think I'm on. I see Will.
Cliff Buck, is that you talking?
Mute myself.
No, you're talking.
Yeah.
Your mute button is here, but I don't think you want to be muted.
Do I want to be muted or not?
It's up to you. I guess it probably would be best to mute, but you just got to remember to unmute yourself.
I hear him.
Talk.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
But we're it's 6 p.m. So let's go ahead and get started, guys.
Okay.
I'll call the meeting to order. If you guys,
thank you.
Yeah, let's see. We have Cliff, Peter, Holly, me.
You don't have to work tomorrow. Those trees are me, Will. That's Henry.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. Oh, look at, yeah, we got tons of people here.
Oh.
Okay.
See Fran or John.
Oh, you're right.
Can you see me? Am I okay? Do I need to move over?
No, you don't.
Can they hear us? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you at the town. Who's at the town hall?
Okay, so John, Fran, Peter, and Chip. We have one spectator, Milt Wright, who's left the room temporarily to get a mask.
Okay. So John Bluen, Fran, and Peter, those are the board members at the town hall?
Yes.
They have you on a computer on here. Your name's up there.
Oh, because my wife's watching.
Okay.
Gotcha. All right, that's fine. So we're, Fran is there. Okay, good, Fran. And Henry, you're there. And Cliff, you're there.
I'm here.
John Bluen is there. Fran Zambella is at. So I think we're all here. So let's get cracking. So the meeting will come to order. This is a public proceeding. You have every right to hear everything that is being said and look at all the exhibits that are offered. Please notify me if you can't hear or see. The Board of Appeals tonight works from a prepared agenda, and we'll be considering tonight's items in the following order. A roll call of Board of Appeal members, which I've already done. We're all here. We're gonna then read and approve the minutes from the preceding meeting. We'll then go to consideration and vote on recusals. And then we'll get to the public hearing of Safe Space Meeting House's appeal from the Planning Board's November 3rd, 2021 decision, which denied the use permit application for 26 Mill Stream Road in Reedfield, Maine. There are 13 issues that we will be considering at the hearing. They are the 13 issues that the Planning Board decided against Safe Space Meeting House. And we will be referencing that November 3rd decision from the Planning Board and basically taking those issues in order.
Will, for the record, I think we probably should ask all the folks who are on Zoom to identify themselves. So because we need that for the minutes, I think.
Okay. So yeah, I'll get to that just as soon as I do just a brief recap of the issues. And then I'll go back to the roll call and get a roll call, not only of the planning Board of Appeal members, but everyone who is present. So tonight's hearing is all about this planning board decision, and we are hearing and considering argument. We're not considering any new facts. So the issues, the first issue is on the third and the fourth page of the planning board's decision. It's under section Roman numeral 5, subsection A. And that issue is the planning board decision denying the land use permit application of Safe Space Meeting House for the change of use of a non-conforming structure from a single family dwelling to a community center club because a number of the requested uses proposed in the permit application were not allowed in the rural residential district and the resource protection district. That's issue number 1. Issue number 2 is on page 4 of the planning board decision. It's section 5, Roman numeral 5 or V, subsection B, which is the planning board's decision concluded that increased foot traffic, vehicle traffic, and parking on the property along Millstream Road would likely have a greater adverse impact on Millstream and its wetlands than the existing use. Additionally, the planning board found that the noise and traffic associated with the events at the property would have a greater adverse impact on the existing use. Therefore, the planning board found that the requirement of the land use ordinance, Article 3, Section 4, subsection D, which allows a change in use from a non-conforming structure to another use, and the planning board determines that the new use does not have a greater adverse impact on the wetlands than the existing use, was not met. That's issue number 2. Then we go to issue number 3, which is Roman numeral 5, subsection C, subsection 2 on the planning board's decision. That's on page 4 of the planning board's decision. That one addresses the uses did not conform with the local ordinances and plans. The next issue for tonight's consideration is the planning board's decision, Roman numeral 5, subsection C, subsection 4. The planning board there found that there would be an unreasonable financial burden to the town due to the sidewalk that would need to be installed to provide safe pedestrian access to off-site parking to the building. That's issue number 4 tonight on the list of 13. Issue number 5 is from the planning board decision, section Roman numeral 5, subsection C, subsection 5. Planning board found that the Safe Space Meeting House failed to meet the financial and technical capacity because it failed to demonstrate a management structure that would ensure compliance with the town's ordinances. The planning board found that Safe Space Meeting House did not submit a financial cost for the project or evidence that of financial resources to complete the process. So that's issue number 5. Issue number 6 in the planning board's decision, it's Roman numeral 5, subsection C, subsection 7. Planning board found that the project would likely cause additional soil compaction, associated runoff, and potential pollution on Millstream and the wetlands. The planning board found that portions of the existing structure were located within the setback from Millstream and the associated wetlands. Based on these issues, the planning board found that the project did not meet the wetland criteria. The 7th issue for tonight's hearing is from the planning board's decision, Roman numeral 5, subsection C, subsection 11. The planning board's decision, the planning board found that the proposed activity would have a detrimental effect on the adjacent land uses due to the proposed activities on the property. The planning board found that Safe Space Meeting House did not meet the adjacent land use criteria. The 8th issue for tonight's hearing is found in the planning board's decision, Roman numeral 5, subsection C, subsection 13. There, the planning board found that portions of the existing structures were located within the setback from Millstream and the associated wetlands. The planning board found that Safe Space Meeting House's activities, particularly in the parking area, are reasonably likely to cause additional soil compaction, associated runoff, and potential pollution of Millstream and the wetlands. The next issue is found in the planning board's decision section, Roman numeral 5, section C, subsection 15. Planning board found that the stormwater criteria were not met due to Safe Space Meeting House failing to provide specific construction plans for off-site parking and stormwater management. The 10th issue for tonight's hearing is Roman numeral 5, subsection C, subsection 17 of the Planning Board's decision. There, the Planning Board found that the traffic criteria were not met due to the lack of specificity as to the scope and scale of the proposed uses, the lack of a sidewalk to the proposed off-site parking, and condition of the dirt gravel road not being suited for heavy traffic. Issue number 11 for tonight's hearing is Roman numeral 5, subsection C, subsection 20 from the Planning Board's decision. The Planning Board found that ensuring safe pedestrian passage requires the installation of a sidewalk, and that because Safe Space Meeting House and the property's owner do not have the required legal interest in the land to install said sidewalk, the life and fire safety criteria were not met. Issue number 12 for tonight's hearing is section Roman numeral 5, subsection D, subsection 15 of the Planning Board's decision. There, the Planning Board found that Safe Space Meeting House failed to provide any lighting plan. Therefore, Safe Space Meeting House failed to meet the lighting performance requirements and standards. Section number 13, or item number 13 for tonight's hearing is from the Planning Board's decision, Roman numeral 5, subsection D, subsection 17. The Planning Board found that there was insufficient information to determine if the parking areas complied with the town's performance requirements and standards. Oh, and I stand corrected. There are 14 issues for tonight. The 14th and final issue is from the Planning Board's decision, Roman numeral 5, subsection D, subsection 19. There, the Planning Board found that the new expanded parking area extended into the Resource Protection District and within 75 feet of the normal high water mark of Mill Stream. The Planning Board found that the proposed parking area could not be built without obtaining a State Natural Resources Protection Act permit. The Planning Board found that the parking plan did not demonstrate conformance with the cutting and clearing requirements, and found that the performance requirements and standards of the Land Use Ordinance Article 8, subsection 19 were not met. So those are the 14 issues for tonight's hearing. We are limiting our the scope of our hearing to those 14 issues insofar as that is limiting. And we're just hearing argument. That's all we can consider tonight. We cannot consider new evidence. The burden of proof is on the appellant, Safe Space Meeting House. The factual record is limited to the record of the proceeding from the Planning Board as it made its November 3rd, 2021 decision. So for speakers who want to speak tonight for the hearing, if you want to speak tonight, it must be argument only. If your argument is irrelevant, immaterial, or unduly repetitious, I'm going to stop you and ask you to move on. After the board makes its final vote, oral votes on the appeal, we will likely reconvene as soon as possible for the Board of Appeals to consider and adopt a written decision. Appeals from an adverse decision must be filed with the Superior Court within 45 days of the board's decision. So that's an outline of the hearing. It's 14 issues. We got to go through each of the 14 issues because the decision contained a ton of findings and conclusions. 14 are adverse to the Safe Space Meeting House, so we're going to attack those. And if anybody wants to get up and speak tonight, it can only be argument. So back to a roll call. We have all of the Board of Appeal members here. Leah Hayes, are you present at today's hearing?
Leah is feeding her children right now. I am Robert Bitar.
Okay.
1 second. There. Yes, I'm Robert Bitar. And she's feeding her children. I don't have a computer, and she's allowed me to come here and to use this computer. And I guess she'll be joining her when the children have been fed, and I will be grateful to have used this facility, her home.
So Robert Bitar and Leah Hayes will be on your computer?
Yes.
Okay, Phyllis Cody, are you there? I see a Zoom participant named Phyllis Cody. Are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, anybody else there with you?
Rolling Cody.
Okay. And then we got Buck's iPad. I assume that is Clifford Buck.
Yes.
All right, Peter Bickerman. I assume Peter Bickerman on Zoom is Peter Bickerman's
My
wife.
spouse.
Yes,
Okay.
it is.
Observer.
All right. Kristen Parks, the town attorney, are you present?
Kristen Collins, the town attorney.
Okay. Oops, sorry about that.
That's all right.
Okay. Well, there's a Kristen Parks here. Who's Kristen Parks?
I'm the town clerk.
Okay. Yeah. All right.
I'm taking the minute.
I should probably know that. Sorry.
That's okay.
Jack Comart, you present?
Yes, I'm here.
Great. Paula Clark, chair of the planning board, you there?
I am here.
We have Karen. Karen, you present? No response from Karen. Her mic is muted. We have an Eric Dyer on the line. I assume that's the town manager.
He'll be here.
Yes, hi, I'm here. I am gonna have to leave in a few minutes to attend a budget committee meeting, but I may be back later, we'll see. But I'm available if you have any pressing questions
Okay.
on my cell phone, but thank you.
With any luck, we'll be done before your budget meeting. Matt Nazar, are you there?
Yes.
All right. And Bob Z, are you there?
Yes.
All right. Anybody there with you, Bob Z?
Nope.
You want to tell us your last name?
Yeah, sure. Bob Zerker.
Okay, great. And I think that's everybody I see on my Zoom screen. We've got no response from Karen. Karen, if you don't want to respond, that's fine. We tried.
I think it says Clifford Buck is in one screen and then it says Buck's iPad in another. That might be a different person.
Yeah. So Buck's iPad. Cliff, are you on two different?
No, I'm just on one computer.
Hi guys, it's Kristen Parks, the town clerk. The Buck's iPad, I believe, is William Buck, who is a planning board member.
Oh, okay. William Buck, if you're on the line and you'd like to admit it, you can go ahead. And if not, you're fine to be anonymous. All right. That's everybody I see. Hey, Peter Bickerman, who's there at the town hall?
Well, in addition to the three of us who are members of the board, we have some observers in the audience. Do you wish them to identify themselves?
How many are there?
3.
All right, since it's just 3, we can do that.
My apologies, Will. I wanted to, this is Matt Nazar. I wanted to say that I am present. I believe that Bob Bitar answered for me when you asked about my name.
Oh, sorry about that. All right. Thanks for chiming in. Peter, anybody to introduce himself at the town hall?
Yourselves for the record.
Jackie Druin.
Greg Durgan, I'm here for another meeting. No, an observer.
Right.
Are you? Yes.
All right. We kind of got some names. It wasn't great, but we got some names. Okay, so moving on to the minutes from the last meeting. Holly, you've got a final draft of the meetings from the last meeting?
Yes, via email, we pretty much went over them. It's just a matter of approving them. Everybody had already okayed them via email.
Anybody have a motion to adopt those babies?
So moved. This is Henry.
A motion to adopt the minutes as they are possessed by Holly.
I'd second it. This is Cliff.
Okay, so Peter Bickerman, how do you vote on that?
Vote in favor.
John Bluen, how do you vote?
Vote in favor.
Cliff Buck, how do you vote?
In favor.
Will Gagne Holmes, I vote in favor. Holly, how do you vote?
In favor.
Henry, how do you vote?
I vote in favor.
Fran, how do you vote?
In favor.
I think it passes unanimously. I have to do the roll calls tonight. So I've listed quite painfully the issues for tonight's hearing. They're long, but you can just go off of the planning board's decision. It's just any of those decisions that are considerations or findings from the planning board's decision that are adverse to Safe Space Meeting House. Those are the 14 things that we're going to be considering. So the process for the hearing part for tonight's hearing that we're just about to jump into, we'll have Safe Space Meeting House go first. Imagine that will be Leah Hayes and or maybe Robert Bitar would want to speak on behalf of Safe Space Meeting House. Then we'll have any abutters that are present and they want to offer an argument. That will be allowed. And then others who are present that would like to offer an argument, that would be allowed. Board of Appeals members can ask questions of presenters. And then I will identify the written documents that will be admitted for the hearing record. They are essentially the hearing packet provided by the code enforcement officer that has been presented, I think, to everyone. Safe Space Meeting House will be able to present an argument in rebuttal after presentations by others towards the end of the argument phase. I don't foresee having a representative from the planning board. We really are just considering the planning board's decision and argument about it. So I don't see how having a planning board member explain their decision or decision-making process is just not relevant to today's hearing. And so since it's such a big decision, we've got 14 things to decide and then a final up and down vote at the end. I'm just trying to keep the hearing just dotting the I's, crossing the T's. And so I don't see that we're gonna need to have a planning board representative speak. That being said, it's a public hearing, so if somebody from the planning board wants to get up and speak, you can do it. Of course, it's got to be argument.
Will, this is Peter. Will, for the record, this is Peter. I may have a question to a planning board representative about, just for clarification purposes. So I want to be sure I understand what the planning board was attempting to do in their decision.
Okay. I mean, if they want to get up and speak, that's their prerogative. It would be towards the end, definitely after the Safe Space Meeting House and the abutters have gone. I'm not going to prohibit it. I just don't see it as relevant to today's hearing. If they're presenting argument and they want to defend their decision, I think that's fine.
Mr. Chair, real quick.
At the end of the argument phase, I'll declare the hearing closed or the evidence phase closed. And then we, the Board of Appeals members, will deliberate in public. And after we're done deliberating, I'll do a vote, a roll call vote with each of the planning board members, each of the 14 issues, as to what they think of each of the 14 issues. It's going, just procedurally, there's a lot to do tonight. So that's an overview of the hearing process. And at this point, giving you a brief overview of the hearing procedures, we're going to jump right into argument. And if you have presented a written argument in advance, I'd ask you, you can definitely go over your argument. I just ask you not to be super repetitious. If you have presented written argument in advance, we have read it and we will consider it. It will come into the hearing record tonight. So With that being said, we will start the argument process, and we'll start with a Safe Space Meeting House. Leah Hayes, would you like to go first?
Well, she's joined me, and here she is. Hi.
Leah Hayes, are you representing Safe Space Meeting House tonight?
Yeah.
Okay. Would you like to go first? Would you, who from Safe Space Meeting House would you like to present argument first tonight?
Well, I think I'll do that.
Okay.
If you don't, would you mind?
I wouldn't mind at all. I would love it.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I think I've jotted down the 14 issues quickly as you went through them. And it seems to me that there are some that are not just repetitious, but they focus on on several points. So we can maybe coalesce a bunch of that and find some way to reduce the number. The big issue, I think, or one of the big issues, is the focus on the Resource Protection Act, and the statement that it is in violation of that act and activities and so on. I think in the paper that was given in the lists, the fact that the planning board and the town, when they initiated a dam project in 2017 and had easements from Helen and me to approve that, the properties were co-joined. They were actually joined at that point. And at that same time, in order to have the planning board approve the park, because it had to be approved, all of this entire proceeding was reviewed in detail and approved by the Department of Environmental Protection and their Resource Protection Unit, a 10-page paper that validated the dam and all activity and the activities that were to go on to be implemented in the property that was the easement property are all approved by the Resource Protection Area. There's no question about it, and that's been done in detail. The planning board has a copy. Eric Dyer has a copy. Eric Dyer is the signatory on the easement itself. So all of this was joined and approved years ago. The issue of resource protection was not an issue. Parking has all been approved. It's part of the roundabout area that's been determined to be a parking area. And in terms of just a clarification, if there are trees to be cut, and that's a problem,
notice he's all frozen.
There are additional parking spaces. If there are parking spaces in contention, eliminate the parking spaces. They're not an issue. So whatever the planning board, whatever the Resource Protection Division has approved is what is a valid of that property, and they're explicit about it.
Mr. Bitar, hang on just a second. So just for the record, can you identify yourself as the speaker?
I am the speaker.
Okay, Mr. Bitar, it looks like your internet connection is a little unstable. Could you turn your off? Sometimes that will help. Then we can hear you, even if we.
Sorry, I didn't hear that.
Can you turn your camera off?
Turn it off? Yes.
If you turn your camera off, we might hear you better.
I'll do that. I'm in the process. Stop the video. Is that better?
Hang on 2 seconds. Cliff Buck, were you noticing that Mr. Bitar's audio was cut out?
Yes, the audio and visual.
Yeah. So okay, so you've killed your video. So Mr. Bitar, repeat that statement about if there are trees that need to be cut, you can alter the parking arrangements.
Okay. I, Robert Bitar, 81 years old, or almost, am speaking for Leah Hayes, sitting right next to me. And for her, I'm also representing as an amicus brief.
So we were just having difficulty hearing you. The last thing I think that came through was you were talking about if trees needed to be cut, that you could alter the parking areas.
The planning board has noted that there's a problem because there may be there's a problem in this area around the building is indisputed. There may be trees that may have to be cut or parking that may not be desirable. That was never presented as an issue, and that could be easily just dismissed. And excuse me, Leah, is that true? I'm sorry.
True, yeah.
Okay, yes, we've agreed on about that. So there is no issue when it comes to parking or trees or any requirements that would be needed for the approval of the Resource Protection Unit, DEP. They've already approved it. That was the first issue.
Do you have any other
issues that are listed? Excuse me?
Do you have any other issues you'd like to talk about?
Well, yes. Thank you for bringing that up. There is another one, I think, that also speaks to several issues.
You're able to hear everything you're saying.
What?
Are you able to hear everything he's saying?
I am now that you have killed the video.
Okay.
Would you like me to repeat? The resource protection document is in the hands of the planning board. It's there, they've received it. The conservation committee, Eric Dyer, they all have copies of this, and it should have been placed with their materials when they review this. Obviously, there's a problem with that, and I think that should be corrected, but I will email, or at least Leah will, email a copy of that to your committee so that they can, again, look for and to find this.
So did you hear the part where he talked about that there already exists a 10-page report from the DEP that approves the property for the use that.
So where is that in the that's not in the hearing record that we have to consider for today? Is it?
I see, and you're absolutely right that it isn't, and that is a grave problem because it speaks to.
Hang on. So we cannot alter the hearing record that we are basing our decision on today. It's only on the documents that the code enforcement officer indicated that the planning board relied on. So this other document that you're asking to introduce tonight, we cannot accept it. We cannot consider it.
Isn't it in the record that if an issue is brought up and there is a rebuttal to that, that some information may be considered in written form and distributed to the members of your committee.
No, you only get rebuttal argument, and you can only give argument tonight. So when you're talking about a document from DEP that's not in the record, that's improper. We just can't consider it. We have to ignore it.
What about the easements that existed?
They're
referred to
is in the written record that was provided by the CEO for today's hearing. We can consider. Anything else we cannot.
The CEO is extremely selective in picking these things, you see, and many issues were discussed, and it would seem that some of those issues should have been in play today.
Mr. Bitar, hang on. I get your point that you want to add some factual documents or some factual evidence to the record, but we can't consider it. Our land use ordinance doesn't allow it. If you have a problem with that, we need to change the land use ordinance down the line. But right now, we're limited to these documents that the CEO gave us for today's hearing.
I do, Will, this is Peter again. I do believe that one of the exhibits we presented was a map with easements noted on it. So we have received some information about an easement. Now, whether to what extent that's relevant, what we're doing tonight, I'm not going to opine.
Right.
Just saying there is such a map with the word easement on it.
Okay, so there is some, I mean, if you're referring to a document that's in the code enforcement officer's packet, Mr. Bitar, that's fine, we can consider that. But if it's some document that's not in the record, we cannot consider that.
Okay, so if, thank you, Will, and thank you, Peter. So now if we've established that there is a reference in the documents to code and to the easement and its legitimacy and signing it, it's signed, you have a copy of it signed by Eric Dyer. Then what about—
Mr. Bitar, how does this easement, which of the 14 issues does this easement affect?
It affects anything that is the word resource protection area, DEP, all of those issues refer to the conjoined property that the easement affected, that Eric Dyer signed for. So that property is now a property of the town, and all those things that went with it are part of that.
Okay, anything else you'd like to add, Mr. Bitar?
I'm sorry you can't see me. I'm smiling basically because I think I've caused you great pain. Anyway, no, that's good. I haven't. Okay, the next issue is a sidewalk. That's referenced several times. And part of that is the question of whether it is abusive and an abuse of whether it is I forgot. Whether it violated the use, God, you've gone over the notes, it's in there, and the specific reasons why it is an issue that's been brought up. Whether it was just inserted and the intention, I think that maybe something that Peter Bickerman, Chairman Bickerman, wants to discuss, and you are Chairman, of course. If that's the case, then the intention of Eric Dyer in going to the fire department chief, requesting information on a cell phone, getting it, in an informal package, restating it. All of this seems improper, an improper way in which the information was received and actually implemented. If that's the case, and when you review the impact of that, which tripled the length of the passage, tripled the money, and actually made it impossible to use and apply, you'd have to have a path that would go around a septic system, around their entire yard, and then purchase that property. By the way, that seemed excessive and abusive. Now, that being said, and this is something that you probably will void in some way, and that is part of the packet that you received. Part of the packet that you received is a statement from the existing residents of 20 Millstream Road, the neighbors, in which they voided all of the problems that exist, permit a path, if it's going to be required, to be constructed in an area that's reasonable. And that too is something that could be done very easily and would be done. That would be done. And that's already been approved and signed by both parties there. They've also talked about, oh yes, I'm sorry. Yes, and it's approved by Lee Mank. Lee Mank is the fire chief, and he submitted, and I don't know if you have a copy, maybe the planning board does, or it probably isn't there, but he submitted a revision of that would have completely nullified this issue. But that being said, you don't have a copy of that. What you do have is a copy now, and I don't know if that's something that's admissible. The copy that has Lee Mank. Yeah.
Sorry, Mr. Bitar, are you referring to a letter from Lee Mank dated December 4, 2021?
December 4th.
17.
No, I think it's a later letter. I probably have it right here somewhere, but it's only within the recent month and 2 months. And it's a letter that has on the fire department stationery.
Hang on. So you're saying this is a letter that came out after the planning board?
After, decision? Yes.
We
yes,
cannot
after
consider,
the decision.
We cannot consider that.
I know. Yeah. There was a letter before that decision, a letter before the decision, during the decision, that should have been in the record. And that—
Is it in the record?
I think it is.
Is it in the record?
Yes, but I think it's been altered. I think it's been altered, improperly altered.
Go ahead and find that document in the record and let us know what it says.
I'd have to speak with Lee Mank. He told me that his document was sent and it was completely different from the document that is the one that has been accepted.
So we can't consider that testimony here today. Those are new facts. We can't consider that, Mr. Bitar.
I understand. Okay, so that's that. In terms of the sidewalk, yes, there's a statement about foot traffic on the gravel road. It seems that this is many of these issues were not really addressed during the meeting in a way that appeared in any way that was reasonable. The lighting plan, for example, was not presented as a requirement. There was none. Many of these issues are they're just not valid. A lighting plan could be produced, and there is one that has been produced, and it's in your packet, but you can't see it now or won't see it because it's not a budget in place there, which it can't be accepted because it's been created after the fact. Yes, that's created right after they received this decision, and several other documents which answered some of their requirements. The runoff was never presented, only in the final version of their document. I'm looking at some of these other things. Wetland criteria. This again goes back to which was determined to be of no issue. Determined that there was no issue concerning that. Or water management, not an issue for the resource protection unit. Whether the parking area is sufficient, that's a vague statement. And there were several submissions of parking statements, and I'm sure you have all of them. And those statements, at first, one statement was from an earlier period. It only identified 35, I think, parking spaces. The later statement identified 65 in that area. The difference was not magic, and it wasn't sleight of hand. The difference in the two numbers were the fact that when the original figures and map was drawn, it only took a portion of the land available. The second statement gave a more complete portion of that. Now,
can you expand the parking lot and then reorganize the spaces?
That's right. I'm sorry. Yeah, and Leah reminds me that in the second diagram of the parking lot, the spaces themselves were expanded to be, I think, 10 by 20. And the actual configuration was made to accommodate the larger number of cars. But that too was not a final parking lot map. A final parking lot map would have to be drawn up, but it's fairly accurate, and certainly would be able to identify 65 spaces. They say the parking area is insufficient. I find that that I think was number 13. I find that unbelievable. The Union Meeting House has a parking area with 12 cars. This is, it seems, I don't want to go into that. Activities. Yes, let's see what else we have here. Activities. There was a statement, I'm trying to find it, one where they said that the activities are not in keeping with the land use ordinance as it's stated. Or was it with the I don't know. But let's deal with land use issues, the activities list. And something that is in your record is a document that Eric Dyer wrote December 23rd. And that's there in its complete form. It's also on the website. In that document, Eric Dyer identified many uses and activities that were possible. They were never discussed as being impossible. And Eric Dyer is a representative and actively sought to be represented as a member of this committee, of the planning board committee. And whether he accepts that role or not, that is something we can talk about in agency law. And that's something that Mr. Bickerman will be able to research. He was an agent of the planning board. He doesn't have to be named to be an agent. All the planning board has to do is accept the results of what he's done. And what he's done are specific things. And that is in agency law. I remember that many years ago, actually 60 years ago when I went to law school. Yeah, so yes, we can look at the representation. You're smiling now. You look at the representation of whether he is an agent and how his agency is affected. I think it was very clear that he employed certain people to delay the process from the very beginning. The planning board knew about it. They met with him to decide a new law that would be voted on in June, hired a new CEO to delay that process. All of this is part of the process, abusive process. And I think that should be represented here and discussed, but maybe you can't. I think tangentially you can. I think you can. I think it's an issue that we could talk about. Now, if he's presented as if he is an agent or representative of the planning board, and during that time says to Safe Space Meeting House that they must, in order for him, if he's an agent and he's a part of this process, and we know
hang on.
He is.
Hang on.
Yep.
So, Mr. Bitar, I let you go down this road a bit, but I got to cut you off there. This line of argument just really doesn't address any of the 14 issues that are in front of us today. I see you have this general argument about abuse and what the town manager was doing with the planning board. I get that. It's just not relevant to today's hearing. I don't see how that shows up in the decision that we have under consideration. So I'm going to ask you kindly to move on to a different subject if you have any.
Okay. I'm looking through the issues and, oh yes, you have one here, financial capacity on number 5. Number 5, the financial capacity, yes, and whether they be able to sustain that. Well, during the time when Mr. Buck was doing that, from that period of his review, we spent $46,000 in legal fees, and that should be
hang on. I'm sorry. Yeah. I apologize. We got to interrupt your argument, Mr. Bitar. Why didn't anybody slap me in the head? We got to vote on recusals first.
Okay.
Oh, is there a motion?
Do you want to do that now?
Yeah, we got to do that now.
Okay, I'll stop talking and you could do that.
Yeah, so from the Board of Appeals members, does anybody feel that any of us should be recused? Okay, I'm going to take that silence as no. We have gotten an argument from the Safe Space Meeting House that Clifford Buck should be recused from today's hearing, and I apologize for doing it so late. We've already started some of the argument, but the argument is from Safe Space Meeting House that Clifford Buck offered this as code enforcement officer, asked a series of questions, I think earlier in 2021. And according to some of the submissions from Safe Space Meeting House, this caused delay and expense for Safe Space Meeting House. They felt it was unfair. And they have, they made that argument in filing their appeal of the planning board's decision. And more recently, they have asked for to have Cliff Buck recused from today's hearing. So I'm going to put the motion out there eventually that Cliff Buck should be recused. But I'd like us to discuss it as a Board of Appeals first. Does anybody from the Board of Appeals, do any of you guys have anything?
I'll be happy to start the discussion. As we know, we have a conflict of interest ordinance in this regard, but it doesn't apply to the situation. And I'm not aware that Mr. Buck has any conflicting financial interest that would make him less than impartial in this matter. So I think the question is whether Mr. Buck's prior involvement at preliminary stages of this application as the interim CEO for part of 2020 and 2021, whether that somehow makes it impossible for him to rule on this fairly. By the way, I mean, Mr. Buck as permanent CEO was involved back in 2013 and involving 26 Millstream Road, but then I feel that isn't even within the realm of discussing, because then I should recuse myself since I was on the planning board back in 2013 and 2014 when we made a ruling on a different issue involving this property. So I think it comes down to whether in writing a letter, 2 letters I can think of anyway, Mr. Buck as interim CEO in 2020, 2021, talking about completeness of the application, whether that somehow makes it impossible or difficult for him to rule fairly on this appeal from a completed planning board decision. To me, it's apples and oranges. However, I think it's, so I don't think there's a need that he should be disqualified. But if Cliff felt, I think he's going to tell it, if he felt that his prior involvement makes it impossible for him to rule on this fairly, looking based on the record, then he should recuse himself. But that's only if he feels that way. That's my opinion on the subject.
I agree. So Cliff, let's put the question to you. Do you feel that you can rule fairly and impartially in this matter, even though you were involved as a code enforcement officer earlier in 2021?
Well, maybe it would help if I described my connection with this property and history. First of all, I don't even know the applicant Leah Hayes. I don't recall ever meeting her personally. I don't recall speaking with her in person, by phone, or having any written communication directly with her. My involvement with this property at 26 Millstream Road is limited to, first of all, a stop work order I issued about, 9 years ago, prior to my retirement in 2010. As a temporary interim CEO from December 1st of 2020 until the end of May in 2021, I reviewed their most recent application to the planning board for completeness in April. A copy of my findings are in your records. I sent my findings to their attorney's office who had requested them, and I placed a copy in the planning board file for their next meeting as an FYI. I did not speak with the planning board about it, nor did they ask about it because there was no action to be taken on it yet.
So I think we as board members, we know we're pretty familiar with your involvement. Can you give us an up-down vote on whether you could be impartial and fair in this hearing based on your prior experience?
I'm sure I can be impartial. I'm not here to judge the merits of the application, but rather to help consider the evidence that the applicant presented to the planning board in their decision.
Okay.
So I don't personally see an issue.
Other appeals board members, any thoughts before we take a vote on a motion?
I'd just say that from what I've seen of Cliff, he is annoyingly stuck to the rules and what's supposed to be, what it says in the law, and not based on any kind of personal animosity, or he would have given me a break. No, I'm just joking around because I didn't ask him for anything, but he's always been very much a stickler for the rules.
Okay. Anybody else?
Will, this is Henry. I don't see any conflict with Cliff's continuing to be involved in the hearing. I don't see any conflict at all. No need to recuse.
Okay, so I'm going to move that the Reedfield Board of Appeals not or vote down any recusal by any recusal by Cliff Buck. Any seconds on that, if you understood that motion?
Second. Fran's angle.
Okay. So, Fran, how do you vote on the motion?
I don't think he should be left out. I think he should be part of the board.
Henry Whittemore, how do you vote?
I'm confused as to how you've worded the vote, Will, whether it's yes to have Cliff recused or no to have him recused. I'm not sure which way you're going here.
Just give me a full sentence. How are you voting? For
Cliff Buck should not have to recuse himself.
Great. Holly, how do you vote?
Also say that Cliff should not be recused.
John Bluen, how do you vote?
I vote that he not be recused.
Peter Bickerman, how do you vote?
I also vote in favor of your motion that Cliff does not need to be recused.
Will Gagne Holmes, I also vote that Cliff should not be recused. Cliff, you don't get a vote on this. The vote is unanimous. Is there anyone else that the board, I'm going to open this up to the public. Anybody in attendance think that any of us should recuse ourselves? All right, I'm taking that silence as a no. So sorry about the lack of order there. So Mr. Bitar and Ms. Hayes, you guys have the floor for your argument if you have any argument left.
I have none.
Okay.
I have nothing else to say.
You want to read your thing? Didn't you have something?
No. We've already gone over it. We've gone over it in some summary form, and that's basically it. We're done.
Great. I appreciate that. And Safe Space Meeting House, Leah Hayes and Robert Bitar, we have received all of your written documents for today's hearing, and we are considering them as argument as long as they don't present evidence outside of our record. So I appreciate your argument, and you'll have a chance for rebuttal later on. So at this point in the hearing, do we have any abutters who are present and would like to offer argument? And now I will open it up to anybody who would like to come forward and offer argument. And I'm just going to offer it one more time. Anybody who wants to come in and offer argument for today's hearing, this is your time. All righty. Since there is no other argument, there will not be rebuttal argument by a Safe Space Meeting House today. We've gotten their final word on the matter. The evidence that we're considering for today's hearing is the decision from the Planning Board dated November 3rd of last year, 2021, and the documents that were submitted alongside with that as the underlying evidence from the code enforcement officer. We are also considering the written submissions of Safe Space Meeting House that they've submitted along with their application for the appeal that began shortly after the Planning Board's decision came out. So those are in the record. We've had communications from Safe Space Meeting House, I think up through this week. We also had just under the wire a written statement last evening from Matthew Nazar. That's also in the record. So these are the documents that are in today's hearing record. And at this point, according to our land use ordinance, the hearing is closed. I think that means that the evidence is closed. And at this point, yeah.
Well, I hate to elongate anything, but I do have a couple of questions for the planning board, some representative of the planning board about the legal questions. I assume not a factual question, but how they interpret the land use ordinance so that I can understand their view of the law. See, I may or may not agree with their view of the law, but I want to try to understand what they were doing in their decision about the law.
And Peter, I'm willing to let them talk. So Paula Clark, you want to answer some questions from Peter Bickerman?
I can attempt to do that. Jack Comart is also here, who is the vice chair of the planning board. And Kristen Collins, the town attorney, is also here representing the planning board. So I think that one of the three of us can likely respond to your questions, Peter.
Thank you, Paula. Am I correct that part of what we're dealing with here is Article 3, Section 1 of the Land Use Ordinance, where it says that a non-conforming condition should not be permitted to become more non-conforming?
Yes, that's correct.
What we're dealing with, the 26 Millstream Road is a legal but non-conforming residence at present. At least that's what it's permitted as. Is that right?
That's correct. It when the structure was expanded a number of years ago, the decision specifically limited the use of the property to single-family residential, unless there was a subsequent approval by the planning board permitting something else. So it does exist as a non-conforming structure at this point, only for single-family residential use.
Now, is it clear from the record that a portion of the structure, that I'll call it the house, a portion of the house is located in the Resource Protection District?
That's correct. Now, what I don't have in front of me right at this moment are the exact measurements or anything of that sort, but there is a portion of the structure toward the stream that is non-conforming for that reason because of its proximity.
And is it under the land use ordinance, a social club, community center / club is not allowed under any conditions in the Resource Protection District? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. Hold on a minute. Let me look at the table for a minute.
Page, for the sakes, page 38 perhaps?
Page 35.
35, you're right. I don't have my glasses on.
So your question was about in the Resource Protection District? Is that? Yes. Yes. That is not a permitted use in the Resource Protection Zone.
The application material submitted to you to the planning board, doesn't it include a map that lists the house as meeting room number 2 or a portion of the house as meeting room number 2?
I believe so. I don't have that in front of me.
It seemed the first portion of the decision, of the written decision of the planning board dealt with that issue, the resource protection issue. Am I not correct?
So, Peter, you're talking about Roman numeral 5, the change of use of non-conforming structure. Is that what you're referencing?
Well, I'm at the top of page 4, which says the planning board finds and concludes that the application seeks approval for uses that are not permitted in the Resource Protection District.
Okay, all right, I see where you're reading.
Okay. Would that, maybe you can't answer this, but would that alone have been dispositive of the application that was before you?
I think very positively, possibly that is true. There are several standards that were not met in our review of this application that I think standing on their own would have caused a denial of the project. You know, the other.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, that's okay. The other is B that I mentioned before, the change of use of a non-conforming structure. That one certainly would have been a single standard that could have caused the planning board to deny the project. Our decision, you know, in that regard was to do a comprehensive review of all of the applicable standards. The application had been submitted, the site review process was initiated, and there were, as you can see, a multitude of standards that were applicable to the project. And our decision was to do a complete review of all of them in order to cover all that ground and be thorough in our review and to have a sense of all of the standards and whether or not they were met.
So I understand. So the second part of the decision, which is reflected in the conclusion on the middle of page 4, that deals with the provision in the Land Use Ordinance, Article 3, Section 5D. Also, it's in 4D, I believe, sort of. Similarly phrased, that an existing non-conforming use may be changed to another non-conforming use provided that the proposed use has no greater adverse impact on the subject property or adjacent properties than the former use. That's what you're dealing with there?
Yes, it was. And so what we were looking at was a non-conforming single family residential structure, and whether or not the proposal in front of us would have caused that to have a greater adverse impact. And we determined that in fact it would, for a variety of different reasons that are outlined more specifically in the decision.
And then the planning board went on to discuss, to apply each of the site review criteria, as you have already said. And isn't it correct that the way the land use ordinance is worded, an applicant is supposed to meet every one of those in order to have site review approval? Is that what it says in the ordinance?
That's correct. Each of the site plan review criteria must be met. The planning board has to make a positive determination about each of those in order to issue an approval.
So it's not a question of counting the numbers and majority rule or anything like that. The applicant has a burden of trying to meet each of those.
That's correct. Yes, that's true.
Okay, now at least I understand a better understanding of the law here and how it applied here. Thank you.
Yeah,
those are my
and if I could add just one more point, I think that you know, there are three broad categories of standards that the land use ordinance puts forth that apply to this particular application. You talked specifically about the change of use of a non-conforming structure. That's a standalone provision in the ordinance. Then there is the set of site review criteria, those 20 some odd criteria that apply under the site review process. And finally, there is a set of standards of review and performance in Article 8, some of which also apply to the project. Not all of them, but some of them. So those are in general the three separate types of standards that are applicable here.
I don't have any further questions.
Great, thanks, Peter. Members of the board, other members of the Board of Appeals, any other questions for Paula Clark, who is the chair of the planning board?
Yeah.
Thank you, Clark. Oh, was there another question?
I have a question. In this, Paula is talking about the
Hang on. Sorry.
Can I ask?
Hang on. Yeah, it's only Board of Appeals members can ask questions.
Okay.
People offering arguments today. So, is there anyone else that wants to offer an argument at this point?
So I can't. Okay.
No, you can. So if there, let me put it out there one more time. So this will be the final time that anyone can offer an oral argument at this point before we get any rebuttal argument from Safe Space Meeting House or Robert Bittard. So is there anyone else who wants to give argument at this point?
Well, yeah.
Going once, going twice.
Yeah,
okay, so rebuttal argument for Safe Space Meeting House. Leah Hayes or Robert Bittard, do you have any rebuttal argument?
Yes, question for Paula. Paula, I do respect her and she knows that. Paula, when we first, this is a historic question.
Hang on. So Mr. Bittard, you realize this is going to be a rhetorical question because Paula Clark is not answering questions from the public or from you.
I understand. Okay. Yeah, no, I understand. I just have to clarify for myself, if you don't mind.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Paula, when we talk about the non-conforming part of this, there was a non-conforming barn. And if you remember, I don't know if it was many years ago, if you remember, the planning board said it's too close to the stream and you have to raise it. It must be destroyed. And it was. And that, I believe, was the part that was non-conforming close to the stream. The house itself was not. And I believe that the house itself is not in any way, what would you call it? Something that is invasive into the resource protection area. So that's, but then again, Paula, I don't know where we stand with all of this. That's the end I have to say. That's the last. Thank you very much.
Okay. So any additional rebuttal argument from Safe Space Meeting House or Robert Bitar? Okay. So at this point, I declare.
Yes. I'm sorry. Leah Hayes wants to ask a question.
Well, so it's kind of a bigger picture question, but I was just wondering how the space could have been approved by the town, approved for the town's use of the property for a park back when the easements were made, and then say that SSMH cannot use it as such.
Okay, so we will consider that question as argument without necessarily answering it or trying to answer it for you. So any rebuttal argument from Safe Space Meeting House or Robert Bitar?
I've spoken more than enough.
Okay. Any additional rebuttal argument from Safe Space Meeting House?
I'd like to thank Kristen. I'd like to thank Kristen Collins for all her help. She knows she's been, she's the brightest person. She's the brightest attorney in Maine, and she really is. If you ask any other attorney, they'll tell you.
All right. Any additional argument from Safe Space Meeting House or Robert Bitar? All right, so I'm declaring the hearing closed, or the evidence closed, however our land use, our Board of Appeals ordinance works. And now the Board of, so public comment at this point is done. So if you're not a Board of Appeals member at this point, please keep your Zoom screen muted and do not try and jump in. So Board of Appeals members, we're now deliberating. And so I think what might be useful is to, if you have any issues that, any of the 14 issues that you are maybe most concerned about from the planning board's decision, maybe offer those up and we can discuss them and deliberate them.
I have one that I had a lot of questions about. Your item 4 regarding the financial burden on the road. And the sidewalk. In the planning board's decision seemed to read that they just assumed that it would be a financial burden on the town, because it might seem like, well, yeah, it is. But first of all, the board did not really state that they would require the fire chief's recommendation for a sidewalk. They did not provide any evidence as to the estimated cost of the sidewalk to the town. They did not consider an option for the applicant to pay for the sidewalk. And the planning board did not get any input from the road committee that either the cost of the sidewalk or the estimated increased cost of maintenance to the road was in fact an excess financial burden to the town. It was just seemed to be kind of assumed.
I get that. I think that's a good starting point. So then I think the question for the Board of Appeals is there any, maybe those things that Cliff just said are not in the hearing record or in the evidence record, but is there any other evidence that the CEO sent us that we can rely on, or that the planning board could have relied on for this finding on financial burden to the town? So did anybody find any evidence in the record that supported the planning board's decision for this item?
Will, I can't answer your question directly because I'm not sure, but I had a different problem with this finding. I read the fire chief's email said he felt a sidewalk or a path. He didn't just say sidewalk. He said sidewalk or path. And yet the finding here in this written decision proceeds on the assumption it's going to have to be a sidewalk and therefore very expensive. So I do have a problem with this particular finding. In terms of it, I think it may lack substantial evidence in the record to get to the conclusion they got to on this particular matter.
Okay. Did anybody else find anything in the record evidence that supports this conclusion from the planning board? So nobody, I mean, so when we look at the email exchange with the fire chief about the sidewalk, do we just feel as a Board of Appeals that that's not enough to make this finding on?
The thing I noticed the most was the lack of specificity from SSMH on some of the issues kind of left things hanging. Like they didn't, a lot of their planning and stuff didn't provide enough detail, I guess is what I'm saying, that I felt like they were prepared for the process. It wasn't so much that they said, you know, they wouldn't do something. It was just that they hadn't really planned it.
Okay, yeah.
Will, this is Henry. With respect to the question about the sidewalk or a pathway and the written record, there is the email, I believe it's email exchange with the fire chief. In that exchange, he's pretty clear that he had concerns over evacuation and passage of emergency vehicles down a narrow lane at adverse times of the year when it might be muddy or adverse to passage. And so he makes a case that he desires a sidewalk. I'm not quite sure what he meant by "or a pathway." If that's a quote, it probably is not, it's my paraphrase. But it seemed fairly clear that he was concerned about passage back and forth in the event of an emergency. And if there's an expert in town that can have an opinion about that, it would seem to me it's our fire chief. So I pretty much took that as part of the written record as it was submitted and as I read it as a lay person and not a firefighter. But it seemed to me common sense would suggest that we need to make sure that emergency vehicles can pass safely down that lane in the event of an emergency. And I think that's what Lee Mank was saying.
Okay, and so did you think that that statement from Lee Mank provided some evidence for this finding from the planning board?
Yes, I did.
I think I did too. And I think also a lot of the emails from the neighbors or butters who just said, you know, a lot of more traffic, vehicles and pedestrians.
I'm not allowed to talk.
No.
Yeah, so Mr. Bitar and Leah Hayes, could you guys just mute yourselves? Yeah, great, thanks. So I think in my mind, I think that the email exchange with from the fire chief, along with the relatively numerous submissions from neighbors who are like, you know, increased foot traffic and vehicle traffic is going to occur with this. And I think you combine those two things, the fire chief saying there needs to be some sort of safe passage, whether it's a sidewalk or a path, and other people saying there's going to be more traffic on this pretty low rent dirt road. it's going to be, it seemed to me that it was a fair leap for the planning board to then conclude that there was going to be an unreasonable financial burden to the town. So I thought it was substantial evidence existed in the record. Was it on the low edge of substantial evidence? Probably, but I thought it was there. But maybe my bar is too low. Peter has
wasn't. Yeah, the question was financial burden, and that just wasn't proven. There was a financial burden to the town.
Well, I think the planning board was making the leap, just saying, hey, if we've got to upkeep this dirt road that's getting almost no traffic now to lots of traffic, and we've got to put some sort of path, it's gonna, I think just reasonable people can understand, it's gonna cost some money to do that. And they concluded it was an unreasonable burden.
Plus, I can tell you too, Cliff, in the planning board's deliberations over this issue, part of the problem is that Mr. Bittard does not own all of the property where you'd have to put the sidewalk. So the town would have to go in with some kind of, I don't know what the rule would be, eminent domain or something in order to put it up. It's not like Mr. Bittard could just put it up because it's across other people's land.
Well, I happen to know that Millstream Road, I believe, is a 4-rod road, so there would be room within the right-of-way to build it.
Okay.
I can't think that was sort of in the back of my mind thinking about this. He doesn't own the right-of-way, but he was, at the same time, he wasn't offered the opportunity to reimburse the town for construction of it either. But I think the room was there.
I don't know about that.
Yeah.
I felt there was ample evidence in the record to support the planning board's findings on traffic and life and fire safety issues, which all involve a similar thing. I happen to think there isn't substantial evidence. There isn't enough evidence in here about financial burden on the town, but this is sort of an academic exercise in light of the requirement in our ordinance that every one of these criteria have to be satisfied by the applicant.
Right.
So,
right. So why don't I ask this? We've started on that one. Are there any ones under the site plan review criteria in the planning board's decision? So Roman numeral 5, section C, site plan review criteria. Are there any other of those issues that anybody has problems with? We've gone through financial burden on the town. Any others that you really think, hey, there might not be substantial evidence on this?
Well, the one that I stumbled over perhaps the most, some of the words, for instance, in financial and technical capacity, number 5, C5, the word nuance, it was a bit of a flag for me. In number 7, the discussion about wetlands and activities, particularly in the parking area, are reasonably likely to cause additional soil compaction and associated runoff. I don't argue with that so much, but there are issues of vagary here. That said, I recognize, and I believe it's true, that the burden of proof is on the applicant, and they are required to resolve any such vagaries. And if the planning board has some doubt about these issues, I believe they are within bounds to find that the criterion is not met. And that's what they've done. That said, there is some nuance and some vagary in some of the language here that perhaps the applicant, with a little bit more due diligence and completeness in filing, may have been able to do away with some of those question marks that seem to hang over the issues.
Okay. Anybody else have on any of these site criteria under subsection C?
I have a short one on criteria number 20, the life and fire safety. The criteria states that the planning board may require recommendations from the fire department be imposed. But they made a decision that it didn't meet the requirement without imposing them or even stating that they would impose them prior to making their finding.
So what?
Cliff, this is Henry again. It seems to me that the last sentence in that paragraph 20, because the applicant does not have the required legal interest in the land, I think I heard you say earlier it's a four-rod road. That may be a moot point, that in fact the town has sufficient interest if it wished to collaborate and to build a sidewalk.
No, the comments for criteria 20 had to do with recommendations from the fire department to make changes, and the criteria just says they may be imposed. But there was no discussion apparently about whether they would be or not. So I just thought that was a little bit of a weak decision. But that's all I had.
Okay, any others you had concerns about? Let me ask differently. On any of the 14 issues that we are addressing here today, is there one or two in particular that you think the planning board just got 100%, that they just, there's tons of evidence for and their reasoning was dead on?
Well, let's start. I mean, conformity with local ordinances and plans. Again, this is a non-conforming use as it exists. The plan would make it more non-conforming, would increase adverse impacts. I think that's very clear from the record.
Yeah. And wouldn't that also make the planning board's finding under Roman numeral 5, subsection B, that whole finding also seems like the planning board had a ton of evidence and their reasoning was spot on.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, and so would I, Henry.
Okay. What about on that first one? Roman numeral 5, subsection A, requested use. Who thinks that is a well-reasoned and well-supported finding?
I think it's well supported. I wasn't too fond of the wording used in the conclusion. It was a little confusing to me, but I think the land use ordinance again says, as I think it says, that if any portion of your structure is in the more restrictive zone, then you're subject to the more restrictive district rules. And since part of that, how I believe the evidence certainly compels the conclusion to me that part of that house is in the resource protection district, that you couldn't use that house as a social club, a community center / club. And so I think that part also is amply supported. That conclusion is amply supported.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree with Peter.
Yeah, I do too. I think that Roman numeral 5 subsection A, I think the planning board is dead right on that.
I agree with that, Will, what you just said. I do struggle with A5 when the planning board states that it cannot ignore the fact about the townwide mailers that have been distributed around town. That to me, yes, one cannot ignore those. They talk about intended use and alluded to in the application, all of which seem a little speculative to me and not definitive. That said, I think this is part of the record. So are the flyers that have gone around the neighborhood part of the record and of the history of the project. These seem a little bit speculative and less definitive to me, but I don't think they detract from the conclusion that the planning board was on target in their conclusion about under 5A requested use.
Yeah. I get that they that under Roman numeral 5 subsection A and then subsection 5 under that. I find that evidence pretty persuasive myself. It sounds like you wish that the planning board had not considered that evidence, but you realize that it's in the record evidence and they relied on it. I think I'm a little different from you, Henry. I think that they were right on in considering that, and it is in the record. And I think that goes to the conclusion that comes under Roman numeral 5 subsection A of the planning board decision. So we differ a little on that, but we kind of come to the same conclusion, I think, at the end.
I think it all gets down to B.
Say that again, Cliff.
I think it all funnels down to B, change of use of a non-conforming structure and the adverse impact.
You think that decision was correctly decided by the planning board?
I do.
Yeah, I do too. So I'm inclined to go through all 14 of these issues and ask you guys a series of questions on how you feel about them. But I'd like to do that after we're done deliberating. I've asked, as board members, we have all looked at the issues for today's hearing in advance. If you guys want to throw out any more deliberation at this point, discussion, I welcome it. And if you'd like to move on to me quizzing each board member on each particular issue and how you feel about it, we can do that as well.
There's one, what I consider to be a very minor issue, and I can't find it right off the top here. I believe it's an issue about lighting. And on one of the documents in the planning board evidence packet, there was a sketch map that showed spotlight here. It's handwritten in dark ink on one of the documents. I believe the planning board found that criterion was not met. I think it's relatively minor. I don't know whether there was a lighting plan or program sort of laid out, but I did see in the documents a place where some lighting, if perhaps a single spotlight, had been proposed. So that's maybe a nit to pick. I think it's quite minor, doesn't change the substance, but I just think I needed to point that out.
Henry, do you think that the planning board looked at Do you think that the planning board looked at that little spotlight on the document you're looking at and said, that's not enough, that's not good enough, and so that's why we're ruling against you on this one?
They very well may have, but that's speculation on my part, and I can't read their minds. And if it's not in the record, I can't say for them. I can't speak.
No, but asked differently, I guess I would ask you, as you look at that document, do you think that rises to the level of substantial evidence for a lighting plan?
No.
Yeah. So I think that's on page 7 of the planning board decision under subsection D, where they go into Article 8. It's the first paragraph there, the lighting plan one.
Yes. Yep.
So I'm just thinking, Harry, that maybe they looked at that one spotlight and said, yeah, that's not enough. We need more. And so we're going to deny this criteria.
Which is why I prefaced my remarks to say I think it's a minor issue.
Yeah. No, I get it.
I think this is a classic example of our limited scope of review under our Board of Appeals ordinance. We're not allowed to substitute our judgment on matters of fact for that of the planning board. Now, personally, I know so many unlighted areas in rural Maine. I can't imagine why this should be important, but there is evidence in the record that would support this finding that the planning board made. So in my opinion, I can't overturn it.
Right.
I'm not suggesting to overturn it. I'm suggesting that it seems scant evidence.
Right. No, I get that. Anybody else want to offer any more deliberation? Going once, going twice. Okay, so I'm going to go through each of these issues. I got 4 questions for each board member. The first is there substantial evidence in the record supporting the planning board's decision on this particular issue? The second is, do you think the planning board made an error of law in its decision on this particular issue? The third is, was the planning board's decision on this particular issue arbitrary, capricious, or an abuse of discretion? And number 4 is, did the planning board correctly decide the particular issue? So actually, as I read that, I think I want to put another issue out just for deliberation. So Board of Appeals members, do any of you feel that any of the decisions that the planning board made, of these 14 that we're reviewing, were in any way arbitrary, capricious, or an abuse of discretion?
No.
Yeah, okay. I don't either. But if anybody had any, feelings like, wow, this one is super unfair, and I think that they had an ill motive and they weren't just sitting as kind of a public body as the planning board, but they were really trying to be mean. If anybody felt that about any of the issues, I think we should discuss it, but otherwise I think I'm ready to close the deliberation.
Well,
yeah.
Can I bring up one more? I just noticed it. I had to note here on the wetland impact.
Number 7, Cliff?
I'm looking at, I've got it labeled as number 6, and I'm using Will's numbers. So that would be criteria 7, yes. But it has to do with wetland impact. It seems that the applicant did not provide, or the planning board did not ask for, a phosphorus control plan from either the CWD, Cobbossee Watershed District, or the DEP to quantify the stormwater effects or the phosphorus loading to the wetlands or the Rannocook Lake watershed. It's not uncommon they do this. Likewise, the applicant did not provide a stormwater plan for the parking area as required in Article 8, Section 10. So without any review for phosphorus, to prove that it would likely cause potential pollution, I thought maybe it was slightly a bit arbitrary, and I would probably suggest something like that be remanded back to the planning board if the applicant wanted to take it back. But the ordinance does require phosphorus reviews in sensitive land use areas like this.
So again, Cliff, I think that's one of those things I think in a perfect decision, I think the planning board would have included that. They obviously did not. So we've got to look in the record that we have in front of us. Do you see any record evidence that supports this finding? I know you'd love to see that phosphorus report, but it isn't there.
Right. No, I don't see anything.
Well,
I guess what was your question again? Say that.
I guess the issue is it looks like the planning board looked at maybe quite a few of written statements of neighbors who said, hey, there's going to be a whole lot more foot traffic and vehicle traffic. It's going to mash down this dirt road, and there's going to be erosion and pollution into the wetlands. And so they made the conclusion based on that. It seems, my reading of the evidence. They didn't feel like they had to go to the phosphorus report.
It seemed reasonable, yeah. Okay.
So I mean, best evidence would have been to have this super duper report that you're talking about.
Okay.
That's not there. And so the question that's left with us is what is in the record in front of us, is that enough?
Yeah, it doesn't mean it was capricious or anything like that.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Fran, on the phosphorus issue, it's a well-known fact that dirt roads, gravel roads are full of phosphorus. Being that I was on a camp road for many years, that was a big issue with the DEP. It's a natural ingredient in the road material, if it's a dirt or gravel road. So I think they were correct in that. They didn't need to specify how much phosphorus.
Okay. All right, any additional deliberation? All right. Does anybody want to go first on the quizzing of all 14 issues?
Are you gonna each issue and ask each of us for each issue, or are you going to ask each person all 14?
I was going to ask one person all 14.
Oh, okay.
And it sounds like you volunteered to be number one, Holly.
Well, I didn't volunteer, but I will go first if you want me to, because I do feel like I've studied this pretty well.
Okay. So bear with me just a second here. So Holly, we're going through the planning board's decision. The first decision, the first issue we're looking at is on the planning board's decision, Roman numeral 5, subsection A. It's on page 3, going into page 4 of their decision. On that particular issue, do you feel like there is substantial evidence in the record to support the planning board's decision?
I do.
On that particular issue, do you feel like the planning board made an error of law in its decision?
No.
On that particular issue, do you feel like the planning board's decision was arbitrary, capricious, or an abuse of discretion?
No.
Do you feel like the planning board correctly decided this issue?
I do.
Going to the next issue, it's on page 4 of the planning board decision. Roman numeral 5, subsection B. On that issue, do you believe there's substantial evidence in the record to support the planning board's decision on that particular issue?
Yes.
Do you feel like the planning board made an error of law in its decision on that particular issue?
No.
Do you feel like the planning board's decision was on this particular issue arbitrary, capricious, or an abuse of discretion?
No.
Do you feel like the planning board correctly decided this particular issue?
I do.
Okay. The next issue is Roman numeral 5, subsection C, subsection 2. Conformity with local ordinances and plans. On that particular issue, do you feel like there is substantial evidence in the record to support the planning board's decision on that particular issue?
I do.
Do you feel like the planning board made an error of law in its decision on that particular issue?
I do not.
Do you feel like the planning board's decision on that particular issue was arbitrary, capricious, or an abuse of discretion?
I do not.
Do you feel like the planning board correctly decided that particular issue?
Yes.
On the next issue, Roman numeral 5, subsection C, number 4. Financial burden to the town. Do you feel like there is substantial evidence in the record to support the planning board's decision on that particular issue?
I do.
Do you feel like the planning board made an error of law in its decision on that particular issue?
No.
Do you feel like the planning board's decision on that particular issue was arbitrary, capricious, or an abuse of discretion?
No.
Do you feel like the planning board correctly decided that particular issue?
I do.
The next issue is number 5. Roman numeral 5, subsection C, number 5, titled Financial and Technical Capacity. On that particular issue, do you feel like there's substantial evidence supporting the planning board's decision?
I do.
Do you feel like the planning board made an error of law in its decision on this particular issue?
No.
Do you feel like the planning board's decision was arbitrary, capricious, or an abuse of discretion on this particular issue?
No.
Do you feel like the planning board correctly decided this particular issue?
Yes.
The next issue is Roman numeral 5, subsection C, number 7, wetlands.
You want me to just answer you without having you to repeat the question every time?
I'm going to abbreviate it at least a little bit.
Okay.
Was there?
Well, did you skip number 5? Did you go from 4 to 5 to 7?
No, we did 5.
We did 5.
Okay.
You just zoned out on number 5. Kidding. So, Holly, on Roman numeral 5, subsection C, number 7, wetlands. Was there substantial evidence in the record?
Yes.
Did the planning board make an error of law?
No.
Was this arbitrary, capricious, or an abuse of discretion?
No. And yes.
Okay. You do have those down.
I've spent hours reading this stuff. Not to mention that I watched the whole planning board meeting too, so I knew the topics a little bit.
Right. So next issue is Roman numeral 5, subsection C, number 11, adjacent land uses. Substantial evidence?
Yes.
Did the planning board make an error of law?
No. No, and yes.
All right. Next section, Roman numeral 5, C, 13, water bodies. Substantial evidence?
Yes.
Error of law?
No.
Arbitrary?
No. Yes.
Correctly decided? Okay.
Yes.
Next one, Roman numeral 5C15. That is stormwater. Substantial evidence?
Yes.
Error of law?
No. No, and yes.
Okay. Roman numeral 5C17, which is traffic. Substantial evidence?
Yes.
Error of law?
No.
Arbitrary?
No. Yes.
And correctly decided?
Yes.
Okay. Roman numeral 5C20, life and fire safety. Substantial evidence?
Yes.
Error of law?
No.
Arbitrary?
No.
Correctly decided?
Yes.
Next issue, Roman numeral 5D15, which is lighting plan. Was there substantial evidence?
Yes.
Did the planning board make an error of law?
No.
Was this arbitrary or capricious?
No.
Did the planning board decide this correctly?
Yes.
Next issue, subsection 5, Roman numeral 5, subsection D17, which is parking area setbacks, etc. On that one, is there substantial evidence?
Yes.
Error of law?
No.
Arbitrary or capricious?
No. And
Correctly decided?
yes.
Okay, final one for you. Roman numeral 5D19, which goes to resource protection standards. Is there substantial evidence?
Yes.
Was there an error?
No error of law. No error of law.
Arbitrary or capricious?
No.
Was that correctly decided by the planning board?
Yes.
Okay, so those are the 14 issues for Holly. Are there any planning board members that would like to vote exactly as Holly did?
You mean Board of Appeals?
Oh,
Sorry.
Thank you. Any Board of Appeals members that would like to vote exactly as Holly did?
I would say the planning board was correct in the decision.
So that's Fran? Was it Fran Zambella who said he'd like to vote exactly as Holly did on all 14 issues?
Yes.
Okay. So Fran and Holly are voting together. I too, as chair, I'm going to vote exactly as Holly did on all 14 issues.
John Bluen, I would vote in the same manner as Holly.
Okay.
On all issues.
Okay.
And this is Henry, Will, same here.
Okay. So I am going to, we have Cliff and Peter to vote on the issues at this point. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. Cliff, you want to go next?
Sure. I could say, okay. I'll vote with her, except with the exceptions.
Okay, let's do that.
I think that on the wetland impact, I'm going to vote that was arbitrary.
Hang on, which number is that?
Number 7, wetlands.
Okay. C7. So do you so this is Roman numeral 5, subsection C, subsection 7, wetlands. So on that issue, Cliff, do you feel that there is substantial evidence supporting the planning board's decision?
Not as substantial as I would like to see it, no.
So you feel like there is not substantial evidence supporting that decision?
That's correct.
Okay. Do you feel that the planning board made an error of law?
I think there's an error of process.
Okay. Do you feel that the board was arbitrary, capricious, or abusing their discretion when they made that decision?
That they were arbitrary, capricious, or what?
Abusing their discretion. They made that decision?
Perhaps a bit arbitrary.
Do you feel like they just didn't get enough factual support for that conclusion?
Correct.
Okay. And
no proof.
Do you feel like the planning board decided that particular issue badly?
I think they had the right decision. I think they just didn't prove it very well.
I see. Okay. All right. Any other differences in your voting from Holly?
No.
Okay. Okay. Peter Bickerman.
Yes.
Do you want to tell me how you differ from Holly, or do you want to go through all 14?
No, I'll tell you how I differ. First of all, I don't differ as to the first two elements of the planning board decision, which those dealing with resource protection and change of use and adverse impact. I think they're amply supported and in accordance with law. As to the site review criteria, I have two bones to pick. Again, though they're academic in light of the law, I think that C4, C4, financial burden on town. I think there's a lack of substantial evidence in the record to support that finding that there would inevitably be a need for a sidewalk, which the town would have to pay. So I think I have no problem with they're trying to interpret the law, but I think it's a substantial evidence problem. As to Article 8 standards, D15, lighting. I went back, I think there's an error of law because the lighting provision they were referring to applies only to developments. Development is defined in the land use ordinance in a way that I think this is not a development technically. So I think they misapplied the law in that particular case. In every other case, I would agree that their decisions were correct.
Okay. So as a we realize, yeah, okay. Okay, so why don't I go through each member and ask, this is for the overall decision, which is on page 7 of the planning board's decision. It's under the heading decision. Based on the above findings and fact and conclusions of law, the planning board finds the relevant approval standards have not each been satisfied and hereby denies the application by motion and vote of 7-0. So this is the application for the change of use permit. So we need to vote up or down on the whole decision at this point.
So we're voting to, could you please state what we're voting on?
Yeah, we need to make a motion. So Peter Bickerman, you want to make a motion? I move to.
Sure, I'm just looking for the precise, correct language.
How about, I move that each member vote on SSMH's appeal for the planning board's decisions.
I second.
That was muffled. I couldn't quite hear it.
I seconded really quickly.
I said I moved.
No, I didn't hear John's. I didn't hear John's words very clearly. Could
oh, sorry.
Move that each member vote on SSMH's appeal from the planning board's decision.
Okay, got it.
And then Peter seconded it, right?
Yeah, we're moving to vote on it. Is that what we're doing?
Yes. Yes. What does a yes vote mean and what does a no vote mean?
Well, you were either approving or denying the SSMH's appeal.
I like that. Okay. So John Bluen, do you approve or deny the appeal?
I deny SSMH's appeal.
Peter Bickerman, do you approve or deny SSMH's appeal?
I deny the appeal.
Cliff Buck, do you approve or deny SSMH's appeal?
Deny.
Holly Romlo, do you approve or deny SSMH's appeal?
Deny.
Henry Whittemore, do you approve or deny SSMH's appeal?
Deny.
Fran Zambella, do you approve or deny SSMH's appeal?
Deny.
Will Gagne Holmes, I also deny SSMH's appeal. The motion is approved and unanimous. Okay, so we've ruled against SSMH here. I have in the back of my mind that maybe I could whip out a written decision here and we could look at it on Zoom together, but I think that's crazy now. So I say we, I'll draft up a written decision mirroring what we voted on here today, and I'll shoot that around. And if we can plan to meet in 2 weeks, we'll get public notice out 2 weeks from tonight on the 17th. And we can do a formal vote on the written decision, and we'll get that out. Does that sound good to the Board of Appeals members?
So,
yes.
I'm by me.
So,
what time?
Should we have an official along that line?
Say that again?
Should we have an official motion along that line? I move the Board of Appeals will meet as soon as possible to consider and adopt a written decision, which the chair will be authorized to sign.
Ooh, I like that. Anybody want to second that?
I'll second it.
All right.
Say it again. Say it again, Holly.
Yes, I agree. Oh, I'm sorry. I agree.
Okay. So we'll do a vote. Fran Zambella, are you in favor of meeting on the 17th for this purpose?
What time?
Shall we do 7 p.m.?
Okay.
6.
7 will work.
7 will work. All right.
Yes.
Henry Whittemore, are you in favor of meeting on the 17th for this?
Yes, and I'm available according to my calendar.
Awesome. Holly, are you for the meeting on the 17th?
I am.
Cliff, are you in favor?
I'm fine, thank you.
John Bluen, are you in favor?
Yes.
Peter Bickerman, you in favor?
Yes.
As chair, I'm also in favor. The motion passes. We're going to meet on the 17th, assuming we can get public notice out on time.
Can't wait.
May I add something for the benefit of those listening?
Yes.
Under state law, if anyone has grounds and standing to appeal, they must do so to court within 45 days of tonight of this vote, regardless of when the written decision is later issued. Just want to be sure that's understood.
So 45 days from tonight to Superior Court. Would anybody like to make a motion about shutting down the meeting and going home?
Make a motion to adjourn.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
The ayes have it. Hey, thanks a lot, guys. I really appreciate it. We'll see you in 2 weeks.
Thanks,
Thanks
Will,
for all
for
your
the good
work,
job
Will.
of running things.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.